welcome to the final day of KVM Forum 2017. And I'm Paolo. So far, you've probably heard my name mostly as the KVM maintainer, but today I'm actually going to talk about QEMU and give you an update of what happened in the past year. We've had 3 releases. We have 50 maintainers as of QEMU 2.10. And the project seems healthy with 400 contributors contributing on the past year and over 600 merges coming from the maintainers. And as you can see, the number of contributors and maintainers, the contributors are the orange line with the triangle, and the maintainers are the green line with the circle. It's growing slowly but surely. Maintainers come and go. Different releases have the different numbers of maintainers and contributors. And right now we are at about 210 contributors and 40 maintainers. But because maintainers come and go, some people actually have only contributed to past releases. And overall, in the last year, 50 people sent pull requests. Based on what's in the Git logs, we can see that there were over 300 bugs reported. Of course, most of them didn't make it into a final release. And we had 7,500 commits, most of which had a formal reviewed by or act by tag by someone else. That's not the author. And overall, we've added 150,000 lines of code. Now we're at about 1,800,000. It seems a lot, but I mean, it's pretty much a standard growth for a project that is 15 years old almost. We're added 10%, little less than 10% over the last year. So it's not an explosive growth. It's slow but sure. Well, not that slow, but definitely sure. We've gotten rid of most of the reports from Converity, from static analysis tool. Now we're at 10 left. When I did the slides, now we're at about 13 or 14, but it's certainly going to go down again before the 2.11 release, for which the freeze period is starting pretty much next week. So we have 10 left, and we've fixed 100. So it was a nice effort on part of Peter Meidel and many others, and also all the others that fixed the few hundred defects before this final 100. And we've added a lot of lines of tests. Of course, many of those are just the expected output for regression tests, but still about 15 to 20% of the new lines of code are tests, which is much better than I actually expected myself. And based on the commit messages of all the bugs that we fixed, 14 were security related and worth an entry in the CV database. So one question now is whether we are good at retaining contributors. Since QEMU 2.0, we've had 59 maintainers and 119 contributors. And over the past year, instead, we've had 408 contributors and 50 maintainers. So you can already guess that we are much better at retaining maintainers than contributors. But actually, that's to some extent expected. It may even be a good thing that people are not afraid to just send a single patch to scratch their own itch and have it committed in the repository. You can see that about 60% of those contributors, 464, have only contributed to one release and then didn't have any need to contribute further. It seems like a lot, but I actually checked a bunch of other open source projects. For example, LibVirt is around 50% as well. And you can see that instead for maintainers, it's pretty rare to be a maintainer only for 3 or 4 releases. Usually, at some point, you are going to stick with the project. There's this strange peak for contributing to 1 release only, and that's mostly due to typos in the name, typos in the email address, and other similarly stupid mistakes that are now crystallized forever in the Git log. So as has been usual for a few years now, here is the Hall of Fame with commits authored, committed, and reviewed. And one thing that is actually new for this year is that there is no one single person that appears in all three top rankings. But still, we can see that for authored commits, a lot of it is cleanups, mostly from Marc-André, who had like over 500 commits, and myself. PowerPC and ARM, as usual, have a lot of activity, more than x86, which is more mature. And for commits reviewed, of course, there's Eric, who is topping everyone else and running in circles around everyone else. So an interesting thing that happened last year was that we had a lot of changes, not so much in the device models, but actually on the accelerators, the CPU acceleration that is the heart of QEMU. TCG got a bunch of new features, new front ends. Multi-threaded TCG finally was included, and to balance it, we also added a way to disable it. So, so that if you don't want all the new features, now you can. Disable TCG actually has to be supported for each architecture independently, and so far it's x86, PowerPC, and S390 that do. KVM had the new immediate exit mechanism that's useful especially on very large machines that have multiple NUMA nodes, and the immediate exit makes it the process of exiting to user space a little less sensitive to NUMA placement and cache line bounces in the kernel. We've had the XM accelerator, which provides support for VMX, so for hardware virtualization on Windows and macOS. It was merged in 2.9. But for macOS specifically, we've also had a Summer of Code student who included the support for hypervisor framework. The code was coming from an Israeli startup, Virtu. Then it was included into the Android emulator, and then it looks like it's making it into QEMU, not in the next release, but in the next one, 2.12. And another interesting focus was cryptography. We've had MBD over TLS, character devices, serial console over TLS, and finally this year we have had migration over TLS. So finally completing the support for TLS in pretty much any communication that QEMU does with the external world. And we also had Virtual Crypto that was mentioned yesterday, actually on Wednesday, in the Virtual 1.1 presentation by Jens and Michael. And like support finally also for QCOW2 images, and replacing, not just for QCOW2 images, but also replacing the old cryptography mechanism for QCOW2, so that, for example, you can change the key for an image without having to re-encrypt everything. And a lot more, some of which have been presented at KVM Forum as well. Today we are going to have a presentation about vHost user SCSI, but and the IO thread polling mode as well. And the others that were presented in last year have been included. So vHost vSOC had a presentation at KVM Forum 2016, the FIO mediated pass-through. So maybe it's really useful to come and present your work so that other people are up to speed and the maintainers know more about it, and it can help reviewing and getting your code in. And lots of ARM Power S390 improvements. As I said, Power and ARM were the most active architecture this year. And now for something different, deprecation. We are thinking about deprecating features that no one is using. So we've already dropped support for a few host OSs, including GAIX and Solaris up to Solaris 9. But we still support a lot of operating systems. We actually have Linux, Windows, NetBSD, macOS as fully supported operating systems, and we would like volunteers for the other BSDs, for Solaris newer versions, and for Haiku. These are not particularly painful, so we haven't removed the support for them, but we would still like to have them better integrated into our continuous integration infrastructure. We've also dropped a few architectures that, as hosts at least, are best kept in museums or in perhaps other kinds of machines like HPPA, IA64, 68K is nowadays really mostly in few embedded machines. But we still support 5 32-bit architectures and 6 64-bit architectures. And of course, we actually support HPPA and Motorola 68K as targets for Linux user mode emulation. So you cannot run anymore QEMU on your HPPA machine, but after you've sent it to the museum, you can still run the binaries using QEMU. And also, we are thinking about deprecating some command line options. A couple of them have already fell, but maybe others in the future will. So talking about continuous integration, our continuous integration system is a combination of several, actually. We have PatchU that looks at all the patches sent to the mailing list. It chooses them and complains about them, if there's anything to complain about them. And it also has a nice user interface that you can use to see the state of patches that have been submitted to QEMU. There's Travis that takes care of testing with a wide matrix of compilation options, commits after they went into a Git tree. So individual maintainers can sign up for Travis continuous integration. And also, after every pull request has been merged, Travis goes and checks what's going on. And then finally, there is shippable that's more focused on testing cross-compilation. And the nice thing about this is that all the infrastructure for continuous integration is also available on your machine, not just as software as a service. So we've had Docker tests for a couple years now, but now it's way more mature. Docker tests run the build inside an operating system container. And that's what PatchU uses, for example, to test on various configurations. And now we've also added VM-based tests that test the BSD operating systems. And of course, needless to say, the VMs run into QEMU itself. Docker tests are also useful for cross-compilation, so you can have a pre-built configuration that cross-compiles on ARM, S390, PowerPC, everything from your x86 machine, which is probably the most likely configuration you have. Another new thing for the past year, new QEMU website, new servers hosting QEMU. The new website separates the user information from the developer information that stayed in the wiki. And we are going to move again to a new server in the next few months, but that shouldn't be a problem because we've done a nice dry run with the migration to the new website and to the new web server. As usual, QEMU has participated in both Outreach and Google Summer of Code. T-shirts for the mentors and the students have arrived just this week. So we've had 1 intern for Outreach Summer 2017 and 5 for Google Summer of Code. Ishani was working for Outreach on the QEMU backup tool, Alexandra on generic PCI Express PCI bridge. Then, as I said before, there was hypervisor framework support with Sergio. And then block layer work with block layer filters from Manos, MTTCG performance improvements from Pranit, and a slightly different topic, a Windows driver for Virtual GPU and Virgil by Nathan. So what's going on next year? Documentation, there was some feeble attempt at building a tooling for documentation in the past few years. Maybe we can do better and actually finalize the work before 2018 KVM Forum. As I say, deprecation and spring cleaning, command line options, perhaps even some targets that no one is using, some boards, whatever the maintainers feel it's better being deprecated and removed. Block layer is still the most active component, probably besides hardware emulation, and there's lots of things that are going on. Lots of them have been presented this year or will be presented today. Regarding testing, one part where QEMU is probably lagging a bit behind is fuzzing, and I would certainly like to have more fuzzing of devices. It's not an easy topic because devices have a complicated interface, and fuzzing them requires also understanding the whole structure of the machine, how to drive a PCI device, what's special about the PCI device that can cause bugs. So it's difficult to find a nice balance between just fuzzing in the AFL, American Fuzzy Lop style, and more targeted testing, more white box testing. But these are the topics that came to my mind. But of course, it's a free software project. Whatever you want to contribute, feel free to send patches to the mailing list, and they will be judged on their merit. So if maybe there will be something else that isn't in the list that will be in the 2018 QEMU status report. So that's it. I'm a bit late, so let's move to the next talk by Dave Gilbert.